Great. Well, thank you, Stacey, for the introduction, and everyone for making it here at 9 a.m. on today, and for the chance to share some of the work that we've been doing at Momentum. I'm going to talk about findings from qualitative interviews that were conducted with 20 gay and queer men here in Vancouver as part of the larger longitudinal biobehavioral momentum health study. So as most of us are pretty familiar with, gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men represent more than 50% of new HIV infections in BC, as well as over half of those living with HIV in the province. The Momentum Health Study, the major hypothesis is that this increased access to HIV treatment will affect the two measures, ART optimism and sexual altruism. And these will interact with substance use at the individual level and then affect risk behavior. So while the development and implementation and uptake of HART has greatly reduced HIV-associated morbidity and mortality, the potential of HART to act as a preventative measure at the population level depends on what happens with HIV risk behaviors at the individual level. So in this environment of expanded access to treatment technologies, including PrEP and PEP, as we heard about yesterday, it's increasingly crucial to understand how sexual health and drug use attitudes and behaviors change over time for gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. So this framed the qualitative inquiry that we designed to explore the socio-cultural context of substance use among Vancouver gay men. Study objectives relevant to this project include an examination of the relationship between substance use and HIV sexual risk behavior in the context of expanded ART access over time, as well as the contribution of drug use before and during sex as it relates to HIV sexual risk. So we conducted an initial exploratory formative phase of research to inform the design and implementation of the Momentum Health Study, in particular the implementation of respondent-driven sampling among Vancouver gay men. It's an exciting part of our project that this is the first time that we've used RDS among gay men in BC. The research team conducted 24 key informant interviews and 39 focus group discussions among a demographically diverse group of gay men to better understand how the various local communities are structured. Some of our findings are highlighted here, as well as some of the key questions that we asked to stimulate discussion during the focus groups. But our findings indicated that substance use was one of the factors that structured geographic and social sexual environments for Vancouver gay men. We know that previous research has demonstrated linkages between substance use, high-risk sexual behavior, and seroconversion. Specifically, research has recognized an increased likelihood to use substances for gay versus heterosexual men. Specific substances have particular uses for the population. There's a distinction between recreational and sex drugs. Some substances are used for multiple purposes, like crystal meth. And some substances serve distinct sexual functions, like poppers have been associated with receptive anal intercourse because of the muscle relaxant effect, and Viagra Cialis associated with insertive anal intercourse. We also know that substance use may be associated with an elevated HIV transmission risk. More generally, and so in light of this evidence, we conducted a qualitative inquiry to explore the socio-cultural context of substance use among local communities. Semi-structured, in-depth interviews were conducted with 20 purposefully sampled gay and queer identified men between August and October of 2012. Respondents were recruited from those who had previously completed a quantitative questionnaire and clinical study visit as part of the Momentum Health Study cohort. Interviews lasted from 1 to 2 hours, and interviews were structured through the use of an interview guide, as well as community maps as prompts. So during the focus group discussions, we conducted a community mapping exercise, individual participants in the focus groups responded visually to some of the interview questions and created these maps, and a selection of the maps were used as prompts to structure some of the broad topics in the interview. Some of the So the findings from the formative research as well as the literature informed the development of the interview guide. And in the interviews, we employed a broad definition of substance use to include all drug and alcohol use. In terms of analysis, audio recorded interviews were transcribed verbatim and a thematic analysis was conducted. A phenomenological methodological approach informed data analysis, and the interview transcripts were systematically reviewed to identify emergent themes within the data. Transcript data was analyzed using the qualitative analysis software in vivo, and interview accounts were grouped into discrete categories which describe common themes of experience. And the analysis and interpretation of the findings was guided by regular member checks. The interview participants were 20 gay and queer identified men from the larger Momentum cohort. They were purposefully sampled for a diversity of serostatus, age, income, race, ethnicity, and area of residence. Participants were eligible for inclusion in the cohort who gender identified as male, were 16 years of age or older, living in the greater Vancouver area, had been sexually active with other men in the previous 6 months, and were able to do a questionnaire in English. The age range for the interview participants ranged from men in their 20s to men in their 60s, and the median age category was men in their 20s. So the major themes that emerged from the interviews included these 3 themes. So the perspectives of the gay men that we spoke with indicated that substance use is a social activity taking place in gay social spaces. Use of drugs and alcohol facilitates social sexual inclusion, and use of substances changes over the lifetime. So taking a look at the first theme, participants described substance use as a social activity and sites of consumption as social spaces. A distinction was made between types of substance use, with certain drugs being deemed casual while others were party or hard. Type of substance use was described as related to social subgroup participation at times as well as social setting. And some substances were described as more available in certain settings, such as harder drugs at house parties. As you can see from the quote here, this participant is describing social events actually being even catered towards drinking or drug use, as well as the casual or recreational nature of the use. So beyond talking about this data in terms of HIV risk, I also wanted to highlight elements of resiliency that the men I interviewed spoke to. Some participants described using drugs and alcohol as a way of participating in gay communities, and using drugs, especially MDMA, as you can see in the bottom quote here, as a way of creating a space of social participation and community connectedness that was a really positive element in their lives. As you can see here, the first participant is talking about drug use as a social activity, but in particular a way of combating some of the isolation that some of the community members may experience. And in the second quote, I like that he was talking about his experience using MDMA at a club, and how it, at the bottom you see here, it created this really beautiful community for like a really specific amount of time. I think that highlights it well. So the use of drugs and alcohol, the second theme talking about the social sexual context of substance use, the use of drugs and alcohol facilitated entry and inclusion into social sexual scenes within the local gay communities for the men that I spoke with. Drugs and alcohol were used as a strategy for coping with social pressure or cultural anxiety and making people feel more comfortable with themselves entering into social settings. Some participant narratives identified substance use as, in fact, even necessary for entry into gay social spaces, and some an inability to be in certain social settings without consuming drugs or alcohol. As you can see here from the bottom quote, this participant, in fact, even said, "It's like I can't do sober," so really highlighting that for him. The use of substances, including specifically alcohol, affected people's sex-seeking behavior, both making potential sexual partners seem more desirable, as well as making it easier to pursue a sexual encounter. You can see in the descriptions of the two participants, the last two participants here on this slide, that talking about drinking to lower one's inhibition, and then making it easier to pursue a sexual encounter, and then the last quote here talking about his sexual experiences in a bathhouse, not that always using drugs or alcohol in that context. And the third main theme that emerged was that substance use really changes over gay men's lifetimes. So the narratives indicated that alcohol and drug use was an integral part of the gay community for all members at some point in their lives. All of the participants I spoke with really had this view that alcohol and drug use was something that all gay guys did at some point during their lives. People's attitudes and behaviors around substance use will shift over their lifetimes, with more substance use among younger men who may, it was offered as a potential explanation that younger men may experience cultural pressures more acutely, and that's why it may be more common for younger men. As you can see from this quote here, this participant is really describing sort of his experience in the past decade or so of his life, of there being a moment when he and his social circle were engaging in a lot more substance use, and then as professional and financial pressures became more prioritized, that activity shifted for them. While participants' accounts identify drug and alcohol use as part of gay men's lives generally, substance use was described as more common for those also recently coming out or entering gay social sexual scenes for the first time. Drugs and alcohol were described as a means of coping with the stresses of coming out, as well as the intra-group stresses of initiation into gay communities. Motivations for using drugs and alcohol changed over the course of gay men's lives as competing social, professional, or financial pressures superseded those that prioritized substance use, and as men aged past this particular coming out period in their lives. So you can see these couple of quotes speak to the coming out experience. That when the first participant is describing when he first came out, it being difficult to even enter a gay club without being sober, or being sober. And then the other quote here on the slide, an older participant speaking about younger members of the community and substance use as a means of achieving acceptance within the gay community. So I have a few conclusions here. These findings were not surprising to our research team and probably aren't very surprising to anyone here today. However, while providing some evidence to validate what we already believe we know about substance use for gay men, it also provides a deeper understanding of some of the nuances of this phenomenon, which can inform the larger momentum study, which is the objective of this project. We see from these findings that gay men's accounts suggest that substance use takes place within what Tim Rhodes and colleagues term a complex HIV risk environment, in which complex social, economic, and physical level factors interact to produce individual drug and alcohol use, as well as related health risk and outcomes. While drug use and alcohol can be associated with HIV transmission risk for gay men, it can also be a form of resiliency and a way of accessing community connectedness. And to highlight the theme of this conference over these couple of days, the findings also speak to the fact that substance use changes over time for gay men and is affected by age as well as historical time. And there's a particular relationship around substance use and the coming out period in gay men's lives. And effective health prevention and promotion interventions need to take into account this fact that substance use does change over time, over the life course for gay men in order to be successful. So in terms of next steps, and where we go from here. Future research plans include analyzing these qualitative data in conjunction with relevant psychosocial data from the larger momentum quantitative behavioral survey. We have event level data from an egocentric sexual network matrix documenting the last 5 previous partners and associated substance use within the 2 hours prior to and during sex. We also would like to look at these findings in relation to some of the mental health variables, as well as sexual sensation seeking and social connectedness measures, just for a few. Also, there's a potential for further qualitative exploration of some of these findings, in particular the interaction between substance use and social coping as it changes over time during gay men's lives, and its relationship to HIV transmission risk. In particular, to better understand differences in substance use patterns by birth cohort and how the relationship to minority stress, coping, and the coming out timeline changes over the life course. I'd like to acknowledge our funding agencies, research program coordination, academic investigators, community partnerships, clinical coordination, research consultation. And that's it for me. Thank you.